What's up, YouTube? Josh Fossgreen here with a brand new lesson series called Fix Your Pentatonics. In this 5-part series, we're going to identify what's the difference between the lame minor pentatonic crap you hear bad guitar players playing and the stuff that actually ends up on great records by artists in all genres. So you'll want to download the PDF. You can do that here. It's absolutely free, and it has all the exercises we're going to do in these 5 lessons. So let me just demonstrate what I'm talking about when I talk about lame pentatonic crap. Here's the groove we're going to be jamming over. This is not the lame pentatonic crap. That's coming. I'm going to show you. This is as bad as I'm going to play all year. Ready? Here we go. Oh, God. Okay, so what's wrong with what I just played? I talk about this in the first page of the booklet, but I'll just say it out loud. I've identified a few variables that I think you can easily tweak the kind of thing that I just played and turn it into something that's actually listenable. This is all in my opinion. It's subjective, but there are some clear differences, I think, between the stuff that you actually hear real professional musicians playing, like the kind of musicians that you like look up to, and then like the dude who plays guitar down the street and you hear him practicing and you're like, oh God. Okay, I think there's some variables we can tweak here. So variable number 1 we're going to work with is sequentiality. One thing that's really lame about licks like this is that I'm just noodling sequentially through the scale. I'm never jumping in the scale. So I'm basically moving stepwise, although there's a couple minor thirds in the minor pentatonic scale because we only have 5 notes. But if this were a 7-note scale, it would all be stepwise motion. So that's an issue. If you make your passages non-sequential, and we'll talk about a couple ways to do that, you can make your note choice sound a lot hipper. Another thing that's going wrong here is I'm playing these notes in 3-note groups, basically, right? I'm going A, C, D, C, D, E, D, E, G, kind of working my way up the scale in these little groups. Now I'm playing what I wrote as problem lick number 1 in the PDF. I'm playing 3-note groups, and I'm playing them as triplets, which is groups of 3 notes rhythmically. So the number of notes in my note phrase is 3, and in my rhythmic phrase is 3. So I get this appalling lack of tension there. This isn't always a bad thing. You don't always have to play a rhythm that doesn't match your note grouping. But that in combination with the sequentiality creates a really lame effect. The other thing we'll talk about a little bit in the 5th lesson in the series is that I'm exclusively using the minor pentatonic scale, and a lot of times professional musicians will mostly use the minor pentatonic scale, but then they'll throw in another note, making it more of a hexatonic situation. We're going to put most of our focus on the non-sequentiality and unclichéing our rhythms. Okay? So with the track, here's problem lick number 1, just so you can listen to it. And this will come out pretty slow at this tempo. Okay, so that's problem lick number 1. I'll play it one more time. Okay, so that's what that sounds like. It's a little painful. Double time is... And this is how these are used a lot of times, is people noodle really fast through these lame licks. And it makes them sound a little bit better because you don't have to listen to them for as long, but we can still do better. So, the first way to fix your sequentiality problem, and this is what we'll deal with in the first 2 lessons of the series, is by changing the size of your note groups. So instead of thinking in 3-note chunks, let's try thinking in 4-note chunks. So you notice in problem lick number 1, if you look at the first note of each triplet group, we've got A, C, D, and E. So we're just walking up the scale, but because we're doing the 3-note groups, when we go from the end of our first group to the beginning of our second group, we're still moving sequentially in the scale. If I do a 4-note group, so I go A, C, D, E, and then my next group's going to start on C, now I'm skipping in the scale from E to C. That starts giving me some more interesting intervals because I get A, C, D, E, C, D, E, G. So I jump a major third from E to C, and then I go C, D, E, G, then jump to D on beat 3. That gives me a perfect 4th there. Okay, so we're getting more variety of intervals, whereas when you move sequentially through the scale, all you get is minor thirds, major seconds. Okay? So here's what exercise 1 sounds like, which is our first solved version of the problem lick. 2, 3, 4. Okay, so here's problem lick number 1 again. And here's exercise 1. Okay, it's getting a little bit better. There's more we can do to make this cooler. But let's try playing this together. So exercise 1, I'll count us in and we'll play it together at tempo. Here we go. 2, 3, 4. Again, 2, 3, 4. 2. For the sake of time, we're not going to play every single one of these exercises at a slowed down tempo, so that might be a little too fast for you right now, but just, get that metronome going and work it up as you see fit. So that's exercise 1. You notice we switched to 16th notes because now we're playing groups of 4 notes. So we still have a note phrase that matches up with the rhythmic phrasing, right? There's 4 16th notes in a beat, there's 4 notes in our phrase, so we're not doing anything particularly interesting with the rhythm there. Now, playing these 16th notes is a little less cliched in my perception than doing the triplet thing with the noodly groups of 3. So we're sort of in the clear there, but we can go back to triplets, so then we have 4 note groups with a 3 note rhythmic phrase, so we get something a little bit more interesting happening there, which sounds like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. Play that again. 3, 4. So when you take a note grouping that doesn't match with the rhythmic grouping, you get shifting accent patterns, which kind of outline different polyrhythmic currents. So in this case, we're getting kind of a 3/4 vibe just by playing the same notes, but organizing the triplets. Let's try that together. So this will be exercise 2 in the PDF. Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 3, 4. One more time. 3, 4. Okay, cool. So it's not the coolest thing in the world yet, but also we're playing it pretty slow. If we were to double the tempo, do it as sextuplets instead, it starts to sound a little more usable. I just tried to put this loop at kind of a medium tempo so this stuff would be playable. Okay, so that's exercises 1 and 2, different ways to fix problem lick number 1. And again, the reason this works is the groups of 4 make the note phrasing non-sequential. So when we jump from the high note of our first phrase to the lower note of the beginning of the second phrase, we get more interesting intervals there, and it's not just the same 2 intervals over and over and over again. Let's explore problem lick number 2 now, which is basically the same thing in its descending form. And this one's actually more common and painful. We hear noodly guitar players doing this, but bass players do it too. I can't just blame the guitar players. Everybody can be guilty of playing this lick, which sounds like this. Here's problem lick number 2. Or here's as sextuplets. I didn't even play right. You can even mess up lame licks. Okay, so we've all heard this lick. It's painful. So we can do the same thing. This is just one of many solutions that we'll explore here, but we can do 4 note groups descending instead of 3. So instead of A, G, E, and then starting back at G for my next group, which you can see it's moving sequentially in the scale. E and G are right next to each other in the A minor pentatonic. We can go A, G, E, D. Then when we start our next phrase on G, we're jumping a perfect fourth, so we get something interesting there. Then we go G, E, D, C, up to E, so there's the major third. So we're getting like major thirds and perfect fourths and stuff, which is a little more interesting. So here's what exercise 3 sounds like, which is our descending groups of 4 as 16th notes. Let's do that together. 3, 4. One more time. 3, 4. Cool. Okay, so then exercise 4 is the same thing we did before. We can take those groups of 4 and instead of just playing them as 16ths, which isn't the most exciting thing in the world, we could try playing them as triplets so we get that shifting polyrhythmic accent pattern going. Here's what that sounds like. Exercise 4. Here we go, together. 1, 2, 3, 4. Again, 3, 4. Here's what that sounds like as sextuplets. So it starts to get a little bit more interesting. It reminds me of, if you've heard Jaka's version of I Shot the Sheriff on Live in New York Volume 2, he does some really cool G minor, in that case, pentatonic phrases, just by grouping notes like this in 4s or even 5s, which we'll talk about, and then picking a more interesting rhythmic grouping. You can get a lot of really cool stuff without even using the tricks that we're going to talk about later in the series. So to summarize what we learned today, we started with these problem licks, which sound like this. You know, even if you play them super fast, they just sound totally lame. The reason they sound lame is because they move sequentially through the scale exclusively, and they use really cliched rhythmic devices, doing groups of 3 as triplets, so there's no tension between the note phrasing and the rhythmic phrasing. And it also uses the scale exclusively. It doesn't add anything else, but we didn't really deal with that today. So what we learned is that a really easy way to solve that problem is to do groups of 4 notes instead of 3 notes. So what we'll talk about in the next lesson is using groups of 5 notes, which gets even more interesting. So thank you so much for joining me. This is video 1 in a 5-part series. I hope that by the end of this series, you will never play again, because I mean, you can if you want to, but I think a lot of us are ready for something a little more interesting to chew on. If you'd like to support me in continuing to put out free content like this, check out my Patreon page, where you can get some cool rewards, including access to an extended version of this play-along and the other play-alongs we use, and weekly music recommendations, downloads of original music that I put out, all kinds of cool stuff. I really appreciate your support there, and it's a cool way you can be a part of these lessons more directly. And you can also buy my books, Electric Bass Scales and Arpeggios and Beastly Scales and Arpeggios, at joshfossgreen.com/books. If you're having trouble getting your fingers around the scales at the speed we're working, there's a lot of great stuff in both of those books. I would recommend starting with Electric Bass Scales and Arpeggios and then get to the Beastly stuff later. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time.